In an age where a single post can reach millions and a single word can shape perceptions, we must pause and ask ourselves, are we representing Islam or are we marketing it? Because not every voice that speaks about faith is guiding towards Allah, and not every influence that carries the name Islamic brings light to the heart. The question isn't just what we share online, it's who we become while doing it. We live in a time when Islam has more visibility than ever before. Every platform, from YouTube to Instagram, has individuals speaking about Allah, modesty, prayer, and spirituality. At first glance, this seems like a blessing, a revival of faith in the digital age. Yet, within that blessing hides a subtle test. Because while Islam is spreading through pixels and screens, sincerity is being tested in the quiet corners of hearts. When dawah becomes content, and reminders become trends, we must ask, are we bringing people closer to Allah or closer to ourselves? The modern Muslim influencer has the power to shape how the world sees Islam, but that power, when not anchored in humility, can corrupt the very essence of the message. Islam was never meant to be a brand. It was never meant to be marketed through filters and slogans. It was meant to transform the soul, to guide hearts from darkness into light. But what happens when the light becomes a stage and sincerity is traded for likes? The beauty of Islam lies not in how it is presented, but in how it is lived. A person may post 1,000 quotes about faith, yet if their heart is distant from Allah, the words remain hollow. True influence in Islam begins with character, not camera angles. The Prophet A changed the world not through social platforms. Through the purity of his heart and the strength of his actions, his humility spoke louder than any speech, and his sincerity drew hearts before his words did. This is the model we have lost in our pursuit of visibility. Many Muslim influencers today begin with pure intentions. They want to share reminders, inspire others, spread beauty. But over time, the applause becomes addictive. The praise of followers begins to replace the pleasure of Allah, and suddenly the reminder becomes performance. The modesty becomes fashion, and the message of Tawheed, oneness of Allah, becomes overshadowed by the brand of the self. This isn't to condemn influencers, to awaken a collective awareness. When we represent Islam, we carry something sacred. Our voices become a trust, our platforms a responsibility, and our words an accountability on the day of judgment. We must remember that Islam is not about perfection, but authenticity. The most powerful dawah is not found in viral videos, but in quiet consistency. When a Muslim influencer lives with sincerity, showing their struggles, their repentance, their growth, they become a reflection of the mercy of Allah. They remind the world that faith is not a performance, but a journey. However, when the focus shifts from serving Allah to serving the self, the damage is deeper than we realize. Young Muslims begin to associate faith with popularity, not piety. They start believing that validation from others equals spiritual success, and that illusion leads to disappointment and confusion. Because Islam was never about being seen, it was about being true. The Quran calls believers to sincerity over showmanship, humility over fame, and remembrance over recognition. Every influencer, every speaker, every reminder giver must ask themselves daily, am I doing this for Allah or for applause? That question determines the difference between light that guides and light that blinds. If we truly wish to help Islam through our platforms, we must return to the foundation, sincerity ikhlas. A reminder without ikhlas may trend, but it will not touch hearts. A video with millions of views may move emotions, only sincerity moves souls. And Allah does not look at the number of followers, but at the purity of intention. The Prophet A said that actions are judged by intentions. That means your private relationship with Allah matters more than your public image. Your unseen acts of worship, your hidden tears, your quiet moments of repentance, they carry more weight in the sight of Allah than 1,000 views or likes. This world values visibility. Allah values what is unseen. So if you are someone who speaks, posts, or shares for the sake of faith, protect your heart fiercely. Guard your sincerity like a treasure. Let your influence be a reflection of humility, not hunger for validation. Let your content be a means of guiding yourself first before guiding others. In the end, the purpose of influence in Islam is not to be admired, but to be a bridge that leads others to Allah and then disappears. The greatest influencers in Islamic history were those who didn't care to be remembered. They didn't seek followers, they sought forgiveness. They didn't build audiences, they built sincerity. And because of that, Allah honored their names through generations. The reminder for us today is simple. If your voice reaches one heart and brings it closer to Allah, that is greater than reaching 1 million who only applaud. The real measure of success is not fame, but faith. Not reach, but righteousness. Not recognition, but remembrance. So let every Muslim who holds a platform remember, you are a servant before you are an influencer, a believer before you are a brand, and your only true audience is Allah. In a world that moves at the speed of a scroll, where every second brings new faces, new trends, and new opinions, the concept of influence has become both a gift and a trial. For many Muslims today, especially those with platforms, the question of how to represent Islam in such a space becomes a matter of immense responsibility. It is easy to get lost in the illusion that visibility equals value, that the more followers one gains, the more impact they have made for the sake of Allah. But the reality is much deeper and more delicate than that. The essence of Islam has always been rooted in sincerity, humility, and truth, and these cannot be measured by likes, shares, or comments. The heart of faith was never meant to be displayed for performance. It was meant to be cultivated in privacy, nurtured through connection with Allah, and reflected through one's character and actions. When a person takes on the role of speaking about Islam, of sharing reminders, or even posting a verse from the Quran, they step into a sacred space, one that carries the weight of representation. Because to speak about Allah is not like speaking about anything else. It is to carry the message of the divine, and with it comes accountability. Many people today find their first exposure to Islam not in mosques or through books, but through screens. They encounter Islam through the lens of influencers, the ones who speak about modesty, prayer, patience, or love for Allah. And while this can be a blessing, it can also become a test. Because when influence is driven by the need for validation, when dua becomes performance, and when the message of faith is filtered through vanity, the beauty of Islam becomes blurred. What begins as a sincere effort to spread good can easily be overtaken by the temptation of fame, where the focus shifts from pleasing Allah to pleasing people. It is here that one must pause and reflect deeply. The Quran reminds us that success in the sight of Allah is not in numbers, but in sincerity. Even a single word spoken with a pure heart can transform lives, while 1,000 eloquent speeches spoken for attention hold no weight in the sight of Allah. To truly serve this deen is to remove the self from the center and place Allah there instead. Every influencer, every speaker, every Muslim with a voice must constantly renew their intention. Am I doing this for him or for me? The Prophet Muhammad, the greatest influencer in history, did not need cameras or social platforms to change the world. His dawah began in silence, in prayer, in tears shed before his Lord. His humility drew hearts, not his fame. His truth spoke louder than any staged moment could. This is the essence that has been lost in the digital age, the essence of quiet sincerity, the power of unseen effort, the beauty of doing something solely for Allah's pleasure. Influence is not a sin, but it is a responsibility. And the more eyes that watch you, the more hearts you carry in your care. To represent Islam means to walk carefully, to speak truthfully, and to remember that every word may lead someone closer to Allah or further from Him. It is not about being perfect, but about being authentic. It is about striving daily to align your actions, your speech, and your online presence with the principles of humility, mercy, and truth. Because one day, every follower, every post, every reminder will be brought before Allah, and it will not be the audience that judges. It will be the one for whom we claim to speak. True influence then is not about creating a brand, but about embodying a message. It is not about being seen, but about being sincere. And when that sincerity is present, Allah Himself makes your words reach where they are meant to, not through algorithms, but through hearts. In this digital age where perception often outweighs reality, the line between spreading truth and seeking validation has become dangerously thin. Many Muslims today have entered spaces once dominated by superficiality, social media platforms that thrive on aesthetics, trends, and attention, hoping to represent Islam with grace and authenticity. And while the intention may begin pure, the environment itself tests that purity every single day. The more one posts, the more one sees numbers, likes, views, followers, and slowly those numbers start to define one's worth. The message becomes shaped by what people want to hear instead of what they need to hear. This is the silent trap of influence. When the heart that once spoke for Allah begins to speak for the crowd. But Islam was never about popularity. It was about truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. The Quran speaks of prophets who were rejected, mocked, and isolated, not because their message lacked beauty, because truth often exposes what the ego wants to hide, and yet they remain steadfast. They didn't change their message for approval. They didn't alter the truth for applause. They understood that their mission was not to be liked, but to be sincere before Allah. When one forgets this, the voice that once carried light becomes clouded with self-promotion, and instead of leading people to Allah, it begins to lead them to personalities. This is not only dangerous for those listening, but devastating for the one speaking, because when dawah turns into performance, it no longer nourishes the soul, it feeds the ego, and an ego that grows under the name of Islam can destroy the very essence of sincerity. That is why scholars of the past would weep before speaking, fearful of their intentions. They understood that words carry weight, and that to speak about Allah without sincerity is like selling diamonds wrapped in dust. The message loses its shine. The modern influencer must remember that being seen by millions means nothing if one is unseen by Allah. Every reminder, every post, every collaboration should begin with one question: would I still do this if no one were watching? Because that is the true test of intention. Influence is powerful. It can awaken hearts or misguide them, and the choice of which it becomes lies not in the number of followers, but in the purity of one's niyya. True influence in Islam does not come from charisma, style, or perfectly crafted videos. It comes from the state of the heart. When a heart is connected to Allah, its words naturally carry nur, light, and that light reaches people in ways that no editing or marketing can achieve. A sincere reminder whispered in private may reach further than a viral video shouted in pride. This is the secret of sincerity that the early generations of Muslims lived by. They were not concerned with their visibility, they were concerned with their accountability. Their legacy still lives today, not because they chased fame, because Allah preserved their work. Every believer who carries the message of Islam today must understand that they are walking on sacred ground. Representing this deen, whether on a small or large platform, means representing the Prophet's message, a message of mercy, humility, and truth. That requires constant purification of the self, because even good deeds can become corrupted when the heart seeks praise. It is not wrong to use modern tools to share Islam. In fact, it can be a great act of worship if done correctly. But one must always remember that these tools are means, not ends. The goal is never fame. The goal is always Allah. And when that intention is pure, Allah takes your voice where it needs to go. You might touch a single soul, and that single soul might become the reason Allah grants you Jannah. So do not measure success by numbers. Measure it by sincerity. In a world obsessed with being seen, choose instead to be sincere. In a time where people market their faith like products, choose to be genuine, because the eyes of people may give you fame. Only the eyes of Allah can give you peace. And peace will always be the true sign that your dawah, your influence, and your efforts are aligned with Him. The world we live in today thrives on visibility, and this has deeply affected how faith is represented. The problem is not that Muslims have entered public spaces. In fact, Islam encourages spreading good and inviting others toward truth. The problem arises when that act of invitation becomes a stage for self-display. When a person begins to share reminders for Allah's sake, but slowly finds themselves checking how many people liked the post or shared the story, that's when something shifts within. The heart that once sought Allah begins to seek validation. And that shift, though silent, is spiritual poison. It's dangerous because it disguises itself as righteousness. One may still quote Quran and Hadith, still speak of modesty, prayer, and sincerity, but if the intention turns from serving Allah to serving the self, the message loses its soul. It's like pouring perfume into an empty bottle. The container looks beautiful, but the scent fades quickly. Many don't realize how subtle this test is. The desire for approval, the craving for recognition, the pressure to maintain a certain image, all of this eats away at sincerity. Islam warns about raya, the act of doing something good for the sake of being seen. And in the digital age, raya can appear in likes, views, and followers. A post that once came from the heart becomes a product for attention, and in chasing the world, one risks losing the hereafter. The heart, when filled with ego, becomes deaf to truth. But the heart that is humble before Allah will always return to Him, even when it's tested by visibility. Because true influence in the eyes of Allah is not about how many see you. It's about how many hearts He allows you to reach through His permission. That is why sincerity is the foundation of every reminder, every act of dawah, and every word spoken about faith. Without sincerity, even truth can become distorted. With it, even silence can become dawah. It is also essential to understand that being visible for the sake of Islam carries immense responsibility. When one represents the deen, even unintentionally, their actions, speech, and behavior become a reflection of Islam in the eyes of others. And that means that mistakes are magnified and inconsistency can harm more than help. That's why the early generations of Muslims would often run from fame. They feared that being known could corrupt their hearts and endanger their akhirah. Today, we run toward it. And in doing so, we risk turning our sacred faith into performance. But faith is not performance. Faith is a private connection between the heart and its creator. It thrives in sincerity, not spectacle. The Prophet taught that actions are judged by intentions, not appearances. So even if your platform is small, if your intention is pure, it is seen by the one who matters most. And even if your following is large, if your intention is corrupted, it may count for nothing in the sight of Allah. The true believer must therefore make their dawah a form of worship, not a form of expression. Worship requires humility, patience, and constant self-reflection. It means asking yourself daily, am I saying this to please people or to please Allah? Am I reminding others while forgetting myself? Am I building my brand or building my hereafter? These are not questions of guilt. They are questions of purification, because every person who speaks for Islam, whether on stage, on screen, or in private conversation, must constantly cleanse their intention. The heart that seeks Allah alone will never be swayed by fame. The heart that depends on people's praise will never find peace, and peace is only found in the remembrance of Allah, not in the noise of social approval. Finally, it's important to recognize that influence in itself is not evil. It's a trust. Allah gives certain individuals the power to reach others for a reason. And that trust must be protected with fear of Allah and gratitude to Him. When someone uses their platform to remind others of the truth sincerely, they become a means of guidance, and that can become a source of ongoing reward. But when that platform becomes a means of spreading confusion, vanity, watered down religion to please the audience, it becomes a burden instead. This is why balance is key. Muslims must use modern tools wisely, not emotionally. Social media can be a bridge for dawah or a distraction from it. The difference lies in intention, discipline, and self-awareness. Before posting, before speaking, one must pause and remember that Allah is watching, and that the real measure of success is not how viral your words become, but how much they bring you and others closer to Him. If you guide even one person with sincerity, Allah can make that deed heavier than thousands of empty likes. So let every Muslim influencer, every speaker, and every believer remember, Islam does not need trendsetters, it needs torchbearers. Torchbearers who carry the light of truth with humility, protect it from corruption, and pass it on with love. Because at the end of the day, all influence fades, but sincerity lasts forever. And on the day of judgment, it won't be your followers who speak for you, it will be your intentions. In today's world, the role of Muslim influencers has grown far beyond simply sharing faith. It has become a complex balance between representing Islam authentically and navigating the temptations of fame. The rise of social media has allowed many to speak about Islam to audiences that were once unreachable, yet this visibility comes with a heavy responsibility. What begins as a sincere effort to share reminders for the sake of Allah can easily shift into an unconscious pursuit of validation from people. The human heart, by its very nature, craves approval, but when that desire overshadows sincerity, the purpose of dua begins to fade. Post about patience can lose its meaning if it's created for attention rather than for truth. A quote about humility loses its power if it's spoken from pride. The Prophet taught that actions are judged by intentions, and in the digital age, this lesson is more vital than ever, because behind every post, every reminder, and every video, there lies a test. Is this done for Allah or for myself? This is not a small question. It is the dividing line between guidance and deception. A believer may still wear the language of faith, but if the heart has shifted its loyalty from Allah to the audience, then even the most eloquent words become hollow. The most dangerous deception is not the one that comes from others, but the one that grows quietly within ourselves. It's the subtle pride that whispers, "Look how many I have guided," when in reality, guidance belongs to Allah alone. True influence in Islam is not measured by followers, views, or applause. It is measured by how many hearts are softened toward Allah through your sincerity. At the same time, we must recognize that not every influencer who speaks about Islam is doing harm. Many have sincere intentions and use their platforms as tools of service, sharing reminders, inspiring youth, and defending truth in a world that often misunderstands it. However, even sincerity requires protection. The more visible a person becomes, the greater the tests of the heart. The test of fame is subtle because it rarely begins as pride, it begins as purpose. But fame, like fire, can either provide warmth or burn everything it touches. Some start with dua and end with self-promotion. Others begin with light and end with noise. when a person becomes the center of their message instead of Allah. The message loses its divine weight, and yet it is not hopeless. Every believer who finds themselves pulled toward the world can return, realign, and purify their intention again. Allah loves those who turn back to Him repeatedly. The heart is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be in constant purification. What matters most is the willingness to pause and ask, why am I doing this? Every act of dawah, no matter how small, should be rooted in humility, because humility protects sincerity. When you remember that you are only a means, not the source, then you stop competing for attention and start striving for acceptance from Allah alone. The real dawah is not about impressing people with knowledge, but about reminding them and yourself of the one who created it. There's another layer to this discussion that we rarely address: the way influence has changed how people perceive Islam itself. When Islamic reminders are packaged for mass appeal, they often get diluted. Complex teachings are reduced to catchy quotes. Deep truths become simplified trends. Modesty is rebranded as aesthetic. In this process, the essence of the message can be lost. Islam was never meant to be consumed like entertainment. It was meant to be lived with sincerity and reflection. This doesn't mean that creativity or modern platforms are wrong. It means they must be used with consciousness. When dawah becomes a trend, people start following personalities instead of principles. They compare, criticize, and idolize, forgetting that every believer is flawed and only Allah is perfect. And that is where harm truly begins. When Muslims start associating faith with individuals instead of revelation, they build their spiritual foundations on fragile ground. A scandal, a mistake, or a controversy then shakes their entire faith. But Islam is not tied to any person, influencer, or platform. It is anchored in the timeless truth of Allah's words. The Quran does not need to trend to be relevant. It has always been relevant. The Prophet's example does not need rebranding. It only needs reviving. So every influencer and every Muslim must ask themselves, am I reflecting Islam, reshaping it to fit what people want to hear? Because while popularity may win hearts for a moment, only truth wins souls for eternity. Ultimately, being a Muslim in today's visible world is not about hiding from influence, but mastering it with integrity. Social media can either be a ladder to Jannah or a pitfall of ego, depending on how it's used. Influence is a gift, and every gift carries accountability. On the day of judgment, no follower count will matter and no comment section will speak for us. Only our intentions will. The one who posted sincerely, even with few views, may find their reward greater than those who had millions of followers but lacked sincerity. And the one who reminded others of Allah while remaining humble will find their status elevated far above those who sought attention. The key is to remember that influence fades, but sincerity does not. Every reminder given purely for Allah, even if unseen, is preserved eternally. So let the believer use their voice wisely. Let them speak not to impress, but to awaken. Let them remember that dawah begins not on a platform, but in the heart. Because when the heart is sincere, even silence can guide, and when it is not, even eloquence can mislead. In the end, Islam does not need influencers who chase the world. It needs souls who chase the pleasure of Allah, who speak with humility, act with wisdom, and live with sincerity. For true influence is not about being seen. It is about being a reflection of the truth that never fades.